Thanks, Tony, for recording. So welcome, everybody. This is Siska's monthly meeting for the month of January, and we're happy to welcome some people from other clubs, Nanaimo paddlers, BC Marine Trail, maybe some people from Comox and the mainland. Anyway, wherever you're from, we're happy to have you here. We've expanded our capacity, so I don't think we'll hit 500. We're good tonight. But there's a lot of interest in Cape Scott, which is nice to see. It's a wonderful place, and it is on the island, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be, aspiring to visit parts up there. But as you'll see, it's not necessarily for the faint of heart. So my name's Alan Campbell. I'm president of Siska right now. We have a number of our members who are on the board online. I'm not going to take the time to introduce them, but you'll be introduced to them as we go along. I'll mention as we hear from various people for different things, because we do have just a few announcements. What we're going to do, we have a few announcements, just some notices, keep people up to date a bit for Siska. Then I'll toss it back to Fred. Fred's our coordinator who organizes these meetings, Fred Pachalski, and Fred is also our representative on BC Marine Trails. He's a director there. So Fred wants to say something about Marine Trails, and then he'll give it back to me. I'll introduce the presentation, and we have not quite a cast of thousands, but we have, well, I guess a cast of about maybe 12 people, different groups who are going to share their experiences, which in Cape Scott, which I think is really valuable. And I've seen these presentations and they're excellent, and they bring out different elements too, which is handy. So not only is it kind of a travel log, but for those of you interested in considering going up to Cape Scott or that area, the north end of the island, this will be a really invaluable thing. And somebody asked before about a presentation, a course last week we had, I think that was the wind apps one. And we put these presentations on our YouTube channel afterwards. So Tony Playfair, who's our newsletter guy and jack of all digital trades, he set up a YouTube channel, and that's where this will go in a couple of days, probably once we get the recording. So just to get started then, I want to, I'll start with some really good news. On the line here is Norm Smythe. Now, Norm is an avowed fair weather paddler. By the way, if you're ever on a paddle and you notice that Norm's name is on the manifest, rest assured the paddle will be fine and the weather will be first class. He doesn't do any other kind of paddling. And also Norm is not a camper, and I don't mean to denigrate that, because there's a lot to be said for getting out there and staying comfortably while you enjoy the outdoors. And Norm has that down to a science. So he has, for the last few years, he has led a trip to Broken Islands Lodge for Siska as a club trip. And he's doing it again this year in September. And not surprisingly, the trip, which takes, 20 to 30 people, I can't remember exactly, it sells out, fills up pretty much right away. So he was hopeful that we might be able to have another trip this year. And he checked with the Broken Islands Lodge. They set aside a time period, which is May 29th to June 3rd, as a second time that the whole lodge would be available for our club if we could organize that. And then it was trying to find, a couple of people who might be willing to do the work that Norm has taken on in the past for the one he's done, and help to organize it for the members who can go. So what I'd like to do tonight, I don't know if they're on the line or not, but is just say thank you and introduce Elizabeth DeRamo. And yeah, you're here, are you?
Yeah.
Great. And Sylvia Moser. I don't know if Sylvia's on. She might be skiing, I understand. So very, very pleased that you two have agreed. I think, Elizabeth, you're going to pick up the organization piece pretty quickly. And we're looking forward then to having another Broken Islands lodge trip for Siska, which would be, as I mentioned, those dates. So what we'd like to do as a first step, and you'll hear about this by email, by the way, this is kind of advance notice, is we want to encourage paddle leaders. So those who are currently paddle leaders in Siska we need to have a number of you go on this trip in order to lead the paddles that will be organized. And so we encourage paddle leaders in particular to respond to the announcement when it comes out so that there's enough going to make that trip possible. And then I think Norm says here we'll need 8 leaders because of all the paddles that occur on each of the days that the trip's occurring. So, you know, a number. And then we'll also ask paddle leaders to ensure that participants have the skills for Energizer paddles, because that's what they are out there, or could be. We take that position. So need to make sure that people have the proper skills in the last 9 months or since last September. And then once Elizabeth has a required number of paddle leaders, then a notice offering this to the trip or to the full membership will be put out, and there'll be standby lists in case people withdraw and you know, changes need to be made. So that's good news, and you should look for that. And we're again very grateful to Elizabeth and Sylvia for helping us out in this way. Is that good, Norm? How'd I do?
You're Elizabeth.
Yeah, thank you for Elizabeth and for Sylvia both. Okay, so that's announcement number 1, pretty good news. And then secondly, so Jenny Sutton is on the line here somewhere, and Jenny wanted to say something about the Currents Clinic. Go ahead, Jenny.
Thanks, Alan. So just to let people that are online know that we have 2 current clinics running this coming weekend. Both are full, as far as I know. So it's run by Paddle Canada instructors that are Siska members. They volunteer their time. And just a heads up that we have 1 and maybe 2 more. They're not posted yet, but just to give you a heads up, 1 on February 26th and 1 on the 27th of February. They're not posted yet because we wait till the first ones have run, and it's a ways away. So we take maximum usually 6 people. So, and it's beginner, early, intermediate. It's not for advanced, you know, we don't expect you to be rolling in the current. So that was that one. And then the other announcement is Alison Moran is in the process of setting up a level 1 Paddle Canada course, probably in April. And she's got an assistant already. There may be enough interest already, but we're looking for more people that might want to do basic, which is the 1 day, or the level 1, which is the 2 day with Siska instructors. So I guess they can email me through whatever route, Alan.
Yep, that's right. You can find Jenny on the website at Instructor Liaison. She's under our contacts, and or you can send it to me if you can't. I can redirect it if you're having any difficulties. Okay, and Lynn Beek. Lynn is our vice president. Lynn's got a pitch to make here, so go ahead, Lynn.
Thanks. There's an expression, many hands make light work, and our board tries to do that. We have 7 positions, and we have 4-year terms in each position. So we make sure there's a good rotation. This year at our AGM in April, we will have 2 vacant positions that are on the executive. They're the secretary and the treasurer. So we will be looking for people to replace our current secretary, who is Delcy McClellan, and our current treasurer, who's Roger Botting. Both of them have done great work, and both of them actually have set up systems to make those jobs a little easier. So each time we look at these, we want to make sure that these volunteer positions are really manageable. And I have to say, they're also a lot of fun. We have no deficit. We have a really solid nonprofit board society working well together. And we want to make sure we continue to offer opportunities for our members to thrive and expand and have fun in the water and on land. So if you're interested in either of the treasurer or the secretary positions, please feel free to contact Alan as president, myself, vice president, or Delcy or Roger. We're all on or you can send it to all of us at exec@siska.ca or to our individual positions. We are really looking for some new volunteers, some new energy. It's a wonderful way to get more involved, to find out really what goes on behind the scenes. So I encourage you to consider it. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Lynn. And I have to say, working with Lynn is a great pleasure. She keeps us really organized. She's got that legal mind and she knows the nonprofit sector, and she's a paddler with a lot of skill and experience. So, and that's the kind of people that you'll run into in Siska on our executive, is folks who really want to give something back and have some background that maybe will help them do a job for us. So I hope you do consider that. I'll move on and just say that something of just concern, and we were talking about this before we started the meeting. Somebody else mentioned that there'd been some COVID in their family. This new variant is so pervasive. So we have been extremely cautious. As you know, we've gone through a process of having everybody upload their confirmation of vaccination and so on. We require that now for all our paddles and whatnot. However, as you also know, that's not a guarantee that you're not going to contract the virus or carry it, and potentially. And there was an exposure on our club paddle, which is January 16th. And that was reported as soon as that became apparent to the individual. And the paddle leader then contacted everybody, and there's been follow-up. And as far as we know, nobody has come up with symptoms or whatever as a result of that. But these things are going to continue, I think. This is just part of the environment we live in. So word to the wise, we need to be cautious. We need to take the precautions we know work, as Dr. Henry says, and hopefully hope for the best, I guess, that way. Okay, so I'd like to move on now to our presentation. Well, I should just ask anybody else, not you, Fred, I'll get to you in a minute, but does anybody have another announcement that they need to make at this time?
Alan?
Yeah.
It's Ron Everard on behalf of Nanaimo Paddlers, and I know there's a lot of us here this evening. I appreciate you and Siska being so generous in opening up virtually all of your presentations, not just to our club, but to other clubs. I think it speaks well of you, it speaks well of your club, and it speaks well of the kayaking community. And it's an opportunity for all of us to build on that. So at least on behalf of our club, thanks for inviting us. I know you had to take some extra steps to accommodate all of 184 people. And I also want to thank Lynn Beek for making that announcement on behalf of people on the executive, because it applies to our executive as well. And we've got an annual general meeting coming up on February for all the Nanaimo paddlers that are online. So thanks again.
Thanks very much, Ron. Always a pleasure to have you guys with us, and we're delighted to see so many tuning in tonight. Okay, so I'll just toss it over now to Fred Pachalski. Fred, go ahead with what you want to say.
Okay, that last comment kind of is a segue into part of what I want to talk tonight, but I'm going to reverse the order because of that.
Hey, speak up, Fred. Speak up.
Can you hear me now, Alan?
Yeah, but you need to, keep elevating your voice. You're such a soft-spoken guy,
Okay. We've been having problems with the microphone on this system. So is it all right now? Is the volume good?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Okay. The idea of sharing the meetings came from BC Marine Trails. They have put together, it's called a cross club subcommittee, and it's made up of members of all the different paddling clubs. And I don't know who came up with the suggestion, but we've tried it a number of times with a number of clubs. I've certainly attended a couple of meetings, and I think it's a great idea. So thanks for Siska and all the other clubs for allowing that to happen. I mean, we've got 184 members tonight, 84 people watching, which is certainly a record for us. So thank you. Siska tracks people who come to our meetings. Remember them? We used to have live meetings where we got together and had coffee and shared books and all that stuff. Well, hopefully someday we'll be able to do that again. But we've been tracking for quite a while the number of people that come to our meetings. And now we've been doing it by Zoom. It's a little easier to do it by Zoom, but and we know that the most popular of all of the presentations that we have been when club members are talking about the trips that they've been on, whether it's along the coast or in another country or someplace. So the idea was to do another presentation. Well, a lot of our club members have paddled northern Vancouver Island and have done the trip from Port Hardy over to Cole Harbour. But it's a long trip. It takes quite a while. And the kind of idea came up, instead of having 2 or 3 people talk about the entire experience, we decided to break it up into geographic sections. And looking at it, it worked out that there were 4 and they're all distinct and unique. So that's why we asked people who had done the trip whether they would be willing to share their experiences. So this is a test tonight. We've never done this before. So we'll see how well it goes. And if it works well, we might do it again. As Alan had mentioned, I'm the rep to BC Marine Trails, and I want to give them a plug. If you haven't checked out their newest online interactive map, please go ahead and do. It's got all kinds of tools that people can use to do their trip planning. On the public map, there are 1,255 displayed sites, and they can be campsites, launch sites, or day use sites. In the works behind the scene that are not on the public map are over 2,200 more sites that for various reasons we haven't shown, and some of them hopefully will be coming up in the future. BC Marine Trails is made up of 12 different paddling clubs and organizations, individual members, and we have some business sponsors as well. Probably one of the best known projects that they've put together is the Sailor Sea, which is actually the water extension of the Great Trail from Horseshoe Bay down to Victoria. They've also created a trail, the Sea to Sky Trail, going up to Howe Sound, the Gulf Island Trail, which has a bunch of different routes that one can take, and then the Cape Scott Marine Trail. It's not a new in a journey, because before first contact, Aboriginal people used to paddle that route too. But what BC Marine Trails has done is they've established a set of interconnected sites that people can link together to do trips. And by putting them together by the names of trails, it makes it easy for people to kind of do their planning and enjoy it a little easier. So with that, I'm going to throw it back to Alan, who's going to be our MC for tonight. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Fred. And I certainly second what you said about marine trails. I, as an often long distance paddler, I have made excellent use of BC Marine Trails site and interactive mapping and all the sites that are, and you get a chance to participate too if you want. If you go on a trip, you can report on the status of sites that you've used. So it's kind of an interactive thing. It's something we can all share. Definitely, good thing. Okay, so let's get started. Cape Scott Marine Trail. What I'm going to do is I'll be sharing my screen first, but very briefly, I'm the, I guess, MC. I'll move it from group to group, and I'll do a quick intro to start. But I'll just mention right now, we have 4 groups, and they will take us around the marine trail that I'm about to show you, and that'll all become clear in a minute. So let me just see if I can find my presentation and share that and run a slideshow. Okay, hopefully you can see that. What you see is the island. And, you know, I have to say, I wish there wasn't a pandemic, but given that there is a pandemic, I can't tell you how pleased I am to live on Vancouver Island. I mean, we have just about everything we need here, and a lot more that many of us don't take advantage of. So we're going to tell you a bit about some of that tonight, because the island is, you know, where we are in Victoria, Nanaimo area, maybe Courtney is not even halfway up the island. And the further you go up, the more interesting it gets to be. And this is the area we want to talk about tonight. So Cape Scott Provincial Park and the Cape Scott Marine Trail that BC Marine Trails has identified is at the very top of the island. That's the area right there. And the interesting thing is, well, it's interesting to me at least, it's almost an island by itself. As you can see, there's just this little piece here. If that was somehow connected, this would be an island. And that gives it really quite an interesting flavor and an interesting history as well, with what has happened in that area over time. So what is this trail? Whoops. Oh, I just want to mention that it's easy vehicle access. Now, for those of you who've done trips, you'll be on the island, you'll be familiar with logging roads and all the joys and trials of going down logging roads. Well, for this particular trip, you don't need to go down any, because from Port Hardy to Cole Harbour, which is the beginning and end of this trip, it's paved and it's about 20 minutes. And that all comes from the fact that you're doing a circuit mostly on the water as you go around the Cape Scott Marine Trail. So here it is. This is the Cape Scott Marine Trail. It's about 110 nautical miles, as you see, goes around a number of capes. I've written it up here, so I don't have to say all this. I would recommend from my own experience that you, if you do this, you set aside 3 weeks. It may not take all that long to go 110 miles, but I tell you, there's so much there. You'll want to have the time to stop and explore, and you may have to, because the weather is going to come in on you at some point. It would be amazing if it didn't. So that's my suggestion about timing. You're going to see lots of surf. These are all pretty much, once you get out of from Port Hardy to Cape Soudal part, these are all exposed areas until you get back into Quatsino. Much Indigenous and settler history up here. There's archaeology. There's social and physical history, geology. That's really fascinating. It's a different kind of place. And of course, the industries up there, logging and mining, fishing, and now increasingly recreation are taking people up to this area. So just a fascinating area. You can't get any better, I don't think. Here's what we're going to have tonight. I've put the names down here on the lower left of people who will be speaking to things, or in some cases, people who are just on the trip. And so this group of 4 are going to take us from Port Hardy up to Cape Soudal. That'll be first. Then Willie Fast and Barry did a trip. They've done all of these groups have done the whole thing, but they're going to focus on these legs, if you like. And he's going to talk about the section from Cape Soudal and around Cape Scott. Very active area, needless to say. And then a larger group, Jenny, Debbie, Michael, and John are online. I believe Jean and I were both with this group when they went some years ago, but we're not going to be talking to this tonight. And they're going to take you down the outside from Cape Scott into Quatsino entrance. And then from Cape Quatsino entrance into Cole Harbour, Gary and his colleagues there, BJ, Mike, and Dave, who did that trip just this past year. So that's the crew we're going to be listening to. And I just have one more thing to say. You know, there's a number of ways you do these trips, and then the stories are what you remember. So I don't think they're tall tales. I think that these are real tales, and let the paddling tales begin. So over to, I think it's Bob is going to be quarterbacking the first group. Am I right? Are you there, Bob? Bob Purdon, are you there? Nothing yet.
Elizabeth was online earlier.
No, I see Bob.
Here it comes. Okay.
Yes.
All right, I see your screen. You want to maximize that. There we go.
He may have to unmute himself, Alan.
Right. Bob, you'll not need to unmute yourself. I can probably do it for you.
Thanks, Alan.
Okay,
You can hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Welcome, everyone. And I was just saying, I'm kind of glad I can't see everyone, or I might not be able to do this, but this is fine. So this is our motley crew at Experimental Bite, ready to go around Cape Scott. Is there a bar across the top here, Alan? I'd like to get rid of that.
A bar across the top. There might, let me just change the view here. Full screen. How's that? Oops.
I guess it's fine then. Okay. So in the front is Elizabeth Purdon, then Ali Morham, Jean Gapsis, and myself, Bob Purdon. We're going to have three of us doing this presentation tonight. Jean will, or first I will give an overview and do a little comparison with the previous trip. Then Jean will do a travel log of campsites and photos taken while we're paddling. And Ali will talk about some special considerations and a conclusion. So this is our shot of the whole circuit, and in blue is our track. And the rectangles are the campsites we stayed at along the way. We spent 14 days on the trip and stayed at 10 different campsites. In Port Hardy, where we started, there are numerous places to stay for the night before departure. There are several places to launch on the Port Hardy waterfront. We stayed on the south entrance to the town at the Quarter Deck Inn. It's on the water and adjacent to a boat launch. It was very convenient for unloading and packing our boats right beside the hotel. They have a compound there that we left our car for $25 a week. And we left another car in Cole Harbour at $5 a day. This map is the section that I'm going to be talking about between Port Hardy to Cape Pseudo. And you'll see there's two tracks on here. Would have been nice if I did them in different colors, but that was too fancy for me. Elizabeth and I paddled through here in 2018 when we were going around Vancouver Island. And in that first trip, after a long day paddling from Port McNeill, we had to paddle across the mouth of Hardy Bay here, and the wind blew us back into the bay, and then we ended up just camping on the west side of Hardy Bay. The next day, we made good progress along Gletis Channel to just past Songhees Creek when the wind came up again. Fortunately, we found a decent campsite that we called Last Chance Waterfall. After 2 nights here, due to wind, we carried on to Cape Pseudo East up here. We should have camped at Jepner Point, where we had lunch, as the tide changed to flood. And while paddling through Tatnall Reef, it took us a while to realize that we're not making any progress. In fact, we're going backwards because of the flood. So we had to ferry to shore, drag our boats up a steep cobbly beach, and rest for several hours waiting for the current to decrease. In 2001, we wanted to explore, or this year, we wanted to explore God's Pocket. So we started in, I was looking for my mouse here, there it is. We started in Port Hardy and paddled the same track. We had lunch at Waterfall Camp and then went to Nolan Point. We stayed 2 days in Nolan Point, exploring God's Pocket, and then we went along the south shore of Naiji Island to Lemon Point, where again we were stuck for 2 nights because of winds. Then we crossed the channel and carried on to Cape Pseudo. This year, when we went through Tatnall Reef, we timed everything perfect and we couldn't even realize any change in current. So the take home is plan for currents and likely wind in Gletis Channel, and plan to reach Tatnall Reef at ebb to flood when traveling west. It's important to identify optional campsites and campsite gaps for trips. The 2 main sources we use to pre-plan campsites are the BC Marine Trails website and John Kamanis's guidebooks. This is a satellite image showing BC Marine Trail campsites. The campsites are all circles. Some are green and some are yellow, but they're all the circles. Shushardi Bay Lemon Point Cove, and Jepner Point, which are shown, are not on the Marine Trail public map, but they are in John Kemanis's guidebook. And this Last Chance Falls campsite can only be obtained from this map. BC Marine Trails is trying to identify campsites locations every 8 to 10 kilometers for their safety mandate. We are going to ask BC Marine Trails to consider adding these additional campsites to their public GPS maps. Well, we're finally getting on the water. This is the boat launch and us getting ready. And it was way too hot that day to wear dry suits. We're departing Port Hardy in dead calm water. And that's a shot of the Port Hardy waterfront. And this is out in the middle of Port Hardy Bay and 30 degrees temperature and no wind. Duvel Point is in the distance and the start of Gletis Channel. Camping in small beaches can be tricky. The left picture is at low tide looking west across Gletis Channel to God's Pocket. The right picture is the campsite at high tide. This site has room for 2 to 3 tents at the upper edge of the beach. And notice the line of wood debris, which is the last high water mark. In the 2018 tide tables for Port Hardy, the high tide at this day was 4.7 meters. So you can see that, and in reviewing the tide tables, the highest tides in the summer months are 4.7 to 5.2 meters in Port Hardy. So this site can be used almost any night except for the highest spring tides. And yes, there is a waterfall, and there's a nice grotto below the falls as well. So you can have a bath and get fresh water. So it's quite nice. From here, Jean is going to take over the presentation.
Okay, so we'll go to the next slide, Bob. And after Last Chance Falls, we made the 2 nautical mile crossing over to Nolan Point on Balaclava Island, which is where we made our first camp. And this is if you show the next picture, Bob, this is a really spacious site. Can accommodate many tents. There's the main tenting area here. There's also a spot out at the point, and then there's more space on the other side of the bay that you enter in, where you come ashore, and that's where we stayed when I was with the Capers in 2015, and I'll talk a bit about some of that perhaps. It's a beautiful site. We were quite surprised to have it all to ourselves because it's extremely popular. And of course, it's the first one at the beginning of Gletis Channel. And the next slide, you can see what kind of a view we had over the channel, where you could see boat traffic coming and going, but also whales. Every time I've been there, I've seen whales out in the channel spouting. And you can also keep an eye on the conditions out in the middle of the channel. So next, our second day, we had planned to stay in God's Pocket and do a bit of exploring. So this is the close-up of our route. Bob, if you can send your cursor over to the west side of Browning Passage, that's the box is Nolan Point. This is about where the famous wall of intertidal life is. Across the bay on Balaclava, just behind this little island, is an interesting campsite. It's sort of a secondary campsite, that overflow site, I suppose, for Nolan Point, which I'll describe a little bit. And then we continued around the top of Balaclava, southeast over the top of Hearst, where we had lunch, and then around Bell, and continued south of the islands in a channel between the smaller islands where there was a large fish farm, and the northwest breeze has really picked up. So we had a lot of wind coming through these channels between the islands, particularly Christie Passage. So if we go on to the next slide, this is what it looked like when we left. It was just absolutely pristine, but there's current in these channels. Hang on there, Bob. Our second day dawned with beautiful sunshine and calm winds. We set out up Browning Passage. First, we went over to, as I said, the west side of the pass to look at the marvelous wall. There's a close-up of Elizabeth's in the next slide, Bob. There you go. And this extends for quite a ways, so it's just capturing a part of it, but it's just amazing. And if you go to the next slide, you can see across the channel the campsite that I was mentioning. It has a beautiful gravel beach behind this rocky outcrop, and it does produce a back eddy there. Now, we were on an ebb, so I had to watch when I left the site not to get pulled onto those rocks by the back eddy. On the next slide, you can get a bit of an idea of what the conditions are like at this particular site. There's some nice flat camping areas and just a beautiful gently sloped beach. So it's really quite nice. Let me just get back to what I'm looking at here.
I'll just
So
let,
this site would have about 2 or 3 nice tent spaces, and they're well protected from winds.
I'll just let the group know that you've gone for about 10 minutes. So just
Okay.
timing.
Next, if you do the next slide there, Bob, this is what it looks like over the top of Balaclava. And then next, we came around heading towards Scarlet Point, past these huge kelp beds that were just steaming. Next one as well, you can get a close-up of just how the heat was coming off of these. You have to wonder about the survival of some of the shellfish in the extreme heats that we had over the summer. On our next, there's Scarlet Point coming up in the distance. And after we kept on over the top of Hearst, we stopped for lunch in a protected cove. There's Scarlet Point. On the next one, this is what happened in the cove we were in. Let's go to the next slide. And now we see Elizabeth sank in right to her, right up over her ankles into this deep, deep mud. I'd put ashore way over on the other side and tried to walk along the top, but my goodness, it just sucked your boots right off. And next one, after lunch, we continued on around Bell, as I said earlier, down south through this channel, and then past Hearst again and back to our campsite. I'm going to try and pick up my pace here. If you go to the next slide there, please. We were glad to get back to camp, to relax, have supper. The breeze continued to stiffen, so I moved my tent from the point where I had pitched it the first night, and this mother grouse and her 5 little chicks decided it was just too much company for her, so we switched places. She took the brood along the logs along the foreshore out to the point, and we settled in the main tenting area. It was really quite nice. I was glad that there was no eagle around to capture them. The sunset from the point was just gorgeous, and we hope the next day would be just as nice. However, next slide, please, Bob. That was not to be. Day 3 was extremely windy and overcast, and it was going against the ebb. We left at 10, and so there was quite a bit of chop and 10 to 15 knots of wind going against the ebb tide. So it was quite an energetic paddle, but we just kind of pushed forward. And next slide, we came to the entrance of Loquilla Cove, where this strange tree with a great big nose is marking the entrance. We had not gotten a lot of good reviews from Loquilla, so we decided to carry on to Lemon Point and round Lemon Point to Lemon Cove, which I did discover, Bob, is on the BC Marine Trails chart now. I think if you go back one, that's a picture. There's Lemon Point with the 2 offshore islands. There's a number of reefs, but we arrived at low tide, so we had to actually paddle outside of all of these islands to get to shore. And then we camped adjacent to the stream. The next day, the weather forecast was just terrible. 30 to 40 knots were forecasted. So we decided to spend the day exploring. We had this wonderful spot on the beach when we first arrived to warm up. And then the camping areas on the next slide, Bob, where there's plenty of room for tents and the stream is right there. And the next, I tried a new Katadyn water filter. I won't tell you the whole story about that, but next slide, please. We continued hiking up this corduroy log skid that came down the mountain, and there were remnants of old logging activity. And the further up in elevation we went, you can switch slides now. We came to other evidence like old trees with springboards and some more recently cut shake blocks. So it was quite an interesting day. It was quite interesting to explore. So hang on. Next morning, we were still pretty undecided about whether we could carry on, but considering the forecast, we packed up, got out on the water, all the while prepared to head back to Port Hardy to launch a coal harbor and explore the more protected Quatsino Sound. But Elizabeth went out into the channel and waved us on, and I was so happy we weren't turning back. We made the crossing to the Vancouver Island side in pretty manageable conditions. Things were moderating past Shushardy Bay and stopped for lunch at Jepther Point. Jepther Point is named after Jepther James Skinner, an early settler who bought the trading post there in 1891. The post had a store, a few sleeping rooms, and soon became a regular steamship stop. This site is known for bears, which we did see. And some guidebooks say it is not recommended for camping because it's a whale rubbing beach. So we haven't heard anyone that has seen that kind of activity and do know people who have camped there. We carried on across Tatnall Reef, which presented no great challenge, having timed it right, like Bob said, and Ali will talk a bit more about that. And we came ashore on the beach just east of Cape Soodle, where we set camp not far from the trailhead that crosses the Cape. It's a very expansive beach with both beach and upland sites. The skies cleared and we had a beautiful walk along the shore before supper and then as the sun was setting. It was just lovely. And I will turn it over to Ali for her final comments.
Well, I'm very aware that we have gone over our time quite significantly. So you guys have both addressed the whole idea of Keynes Channel and Tatnall Reef being places you really need to there we go. Thanks, Bob. This is them in 2018 after they battled the currents. Next slide. And can you go to the next? Yep. This is us on Tatnall Reef. This is what it looked like. We had no problem. Next slide, please. I think is the movie. We'll just watch a very brief section of this. And this is just to show the sea state. So even though it looked like it was fairly calm, we were definitely in 3-foot waves. So let's just go on to the next one, Bob. We won't watch this whole thing. If you can. Yeah, perfect. So I spent a lot of time thinking about leave no trace principles, and Elizabeth had brought along this fire pit, which is really great. Next slide. And Jean had ordered one that, can you go to the next one? Yeah, there it is. That would have been really good to have too, because it had an area for grilling on it. I had nope, go to the next one. That was good. And then I had a little bio stove that I used just little bits of wood from the beach and was able to almost use it every day to boil water and have my breakfast with. So it was really cut down on the amount of fuel I had to bring. It's an excellent thing. It's only sort of a 1 liter size. So really good for one person. Next slide. This is, we baked a cake, so you don't need to bring a whole bunch of stuff. You can still do stovetop cooking with a lot of different things. Next slide. Because it was Jean's birthday, so we had a happy birthday for her after we baked our cake. It was really a nice little treat. Next slide. And then it's important to be fashionable when you're out on making sure you have everything, including a party dress. Next slide. And we all have our different personalities when we're on trips. Some of us like to have afternoon naps. Some of us love to, next slide, walk on the beach and find treasures. If you can get to the next slide. Yep. And not just those kind of treasures, other ones too. And next one, some of us find ways to wait out the storm by knitting Christmas presents. And the last slide, please. And all trips have their ups and downs, and sometimes they go sideways, but just as I enjoyed this 14 days with these fine folks, I also enjoyed the hours of putting this wonderful presentation together for everybody. And that's us.
Oh, thanks very much, Ali. And thanks, Bob and Jean and Elizabeth as well. That was great. Very good. Okay, so we're going to move on now to the next section, which, if you remember, takes us from Cape Soudal across the top of the island and down around Cape Scott. Willie Fast and Barry Turner did that trip, and Willie has and Barry have created this slideshow, which I'm going to run for him, and I will do that. And Willie, you can just go ahead when you're ready and take it away. Can you hear me, Willie? Maybe you need to unmute. Willie, are you out there?
He needs to unmute.
Yeah, I'm asking him to do that.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Sorry for the hiccup. So thank you to Alan and thank you to Fred for inviting us to speak about this portion of the journey. This is a piece of a trip that Barry and I did last year, and we also had the assistance of Rob Zacharias with logistical support. He helped us pre-position a car in Zabalos. That was our planned exiting point. And Rob actually ended up paddling with us for the first couple of days of the trip as well. And this is just us three launching at Port Hardy, same place as Bob and company at the quarterdeck. It's a great place to launch. Next slide, Alan. Here's a quick overview of this section of this trip. So you can see top right is Cape Soudal, and then en route to Cape Scott on the bottom left are a series of bights or bays consisting of Shuttleworth Bight, Nissen Bight, Nels Bight, and Experiment Bight. And our initial plan was to leave Cape Soudal and paddle all the way to Experiment Bight in one day. And if the weather and conditions were suitable, we wanted to quickly pop around Cape Scott and probably camp either at Geist Bay or continue down to San Joe Bay. As it turns out, it was a little bit of a different trip. Next slide, Alan. This is just another view of Cape Soudal, looking back towards Jepther Point. Behind Jepther Point, there is Galitas Channel that we also ended up coming up. So this is looking that way. Next slide, Alan. Again, the same view, Barry and Rob on that beach. Next slide, Alan. Camping there is great. There's just tons of beach and all kinds of opportunities for setting up your tent in way above the high water mark in amongst the logs. Next slide. So this is also Cape Soudal, but now looking the other way towards the north. And at the very northern tip, that's the most northerly part of Vancouver Island. And the reason I point this out, it's actually a cool little place up there. And there's petroglyphs to be found up there. And that whole entire northern part of Cape Soudal currently still shows up as IR, Indian Reserve, on the charts. And it was a long time First Nations site that was bombed twice by the British in retaliation for the First Nations having killed some deserters. So it was bombed in 1850 and 1870. And after the second bombing, they picked up stakes and eventually moved over to Bull Harbour, which I'll show you in a second. Next slide. So here we hiked over to the petroglyphs. It's a pretty cool little area there at low tide. There's this big, huge rock. And if you poke around long enough, you'll actually see 2 or 3 different petroglyphs. And it's actually quite an experience to stand there and contemplate when these things were made and why they were made and by whom they were made. It kind of puts a different context to the experience, and it kind of humbles you a bit. Next slide. This is the very northern part of Cape Soudal, looking across Queen Charlotte Sound over to Hope Island. And I mentioned after the second bombing, the First Nations actually pulled up stakes and moved over to Hope Island and settled in Bull Harbour. And as a result, all of Hope Island is currently IR as well. And here you can see Nawitty Bar. Nawitty Bar also is known for really rough water in certain conditions. But the reason I pointed out here is because there is a current station there in the current tables, and that's what we use to help plan our trip. Next slide. Up there, we came across some pretty cool little micro ecosystems, and we found chocolate lilies and Indian paintbrush, which is pretty rare for such an exposed, pounded little cape. It was neat to see these fragile little plants eking out in existence. This was beginning of June. Next slide. So I thought I would review the weather forecast and the current forecast for the days that we were paddling. So this was the 4 a.m. environment weather forecast for marine weather for West Coast Vancouver Island North. And it was calling for winds of the south between 10 and 20 knots and becoming northwest in the early evening. And a sea state was forecast to be 2 meters. Next slide. So we thought we were going to be golden. By leaving Cape Soudal, we were going to be in the lee of the forecast south winds. And so we thought 2 thumbs up, it's all going to be good. We're going to be paddling in the lee and things should be great. Next slide. So this is the iTides current forecast for Nawitty Bar. So you can see on the day that we were paddling this stretch, there was a slack current was occurring at the turn at 7:18 in the morning, with an ebb current building towards 10:30 with a max current of -2.6, and then decreasing again to the next turn at basically 1:30. Next slide. So again, we thought we were going to be golden. We would be paddling with a building ebb current. So we were going to be in the lee of the wind and with a favorable current. So it was all thumbs for paddling that day. Next slide. So here is, thank you, Rob, actually for taking this picture. This is Barry and I preparing to leave Cape Soudal. We were just doing a radio check with Prince Rupert Coast Guard Radio to make sure that we were in touch with them. And you can actually see a difference in the water texture there out towards the Cape from where we were sitting. And that's a pretty notable feature, that Cape Soudal is really the last stretch of protected water. After that, you begin to become more exposed to the swell coming in off the open ocean. Next slide. And although we had to say goodbye to Rob that day, he was heading back home. This was the smell that was lingering with us as we paddled away and said goodbye to Rob. Next slide. So this was actually our actual track that we paddled that day, the light blue line. So you can see we left Cape Soudal and across Shuttleworth Bight. It was all as expected. We were riding the ebb current. We were in the lee of the wind. We were averaging 4.5 knots of paddling speed, and everything was just great. And likewise, we crossed Nissen Bight, and then we eventually hit Frederickson Point. Next slide, Helen. Once we hit Frederickson Point, all of a sudden we noticed like we were basically slammed by a huge headwind right as we came around Frederickson Point, and it was big. It was 20 to 25 knots, right up the nose. And Barry and I sort of had a little conference and said, well, it's big wind, what do we do? And we said, well, let's at least push on to experiment bite and see how that goes. And so that's what we tried to do. And so we paddled for an hour, leaving Frederickson Point, hardly making any headway. And after an hour, we had barely gone 1 nautical mile. And you can see from our actual track there, we actually bailed and said, we're not going to make experiment bite. Let's just bail at it down into Nell's Bite. So we hung a left and rode the surf into Nell's Bite and ended up camping at Nell's Bite for the night. Next slide. You know, we were wondering why the heck, where did all those big winds come from? And it turns out Hansen Lagoon is open to the south, and it acts like a big funnel up this long narrow inlet with a low saltwater estuary marsh at the end and a lowland opening right into Nell's Bite. So we were actually battling a huge gap wind that was coming out of there. So just something to be aware of. You might think that you're going to be in the lee, but you're not necessarily in the lee when there are opportunities for gap winds. Next slide. So here we are. This was our landing at Nell's Bite. And you can see the weather wasn't that great. There was a little bit of surf, but not too bad. But it's a beautiful beach. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, at this point when this picture was taken, Barry and I had humped all our gear up to the beach, and I had put my kayak to bed for the night. So I'm a big believer in using like a consistent protocol for putting things away, because I think that consistent routines breed confidence and help you to avoid errors. And I thought that that's what I was doing this time. You can see my boat was all packed away. I put away my paddle and both paddles and my tow belt and my spray skirt and my helmet, everything packed away, cockpit cover on, and my boat was being ready to be carried up to the beach. But you can notice that I'm still wearing my PFD, and that will come back to haunt me. Next slide. This was a campsite. It was a great little campsite at Nell's Bite. Again, it's BC Marine Trails. It's part of the Cape Scott Marine Hiking Trail. Barry, my paddling partner, is just an amazing camper. And if we call for tarps up, 5 minutes later, he literally does have his tarp up, nice and taut and well positioned. Next slide. In contrast, there's my tarp in the back. Not very efficiently put up. Yeah, I was pretty knackered at this point. We had a big day and finished with a really tough day. Next slide. So this was my camp, getting ready to settle down for the night. And you'll notice that my PFD is still laying on the ground, not packed away where I usually pack it away. The next morning, I got up and wandered over off into the bush to have my morning pee. And I noticed something laying beside the trail. And the closer I got, I figured, what is that laying there? And I got closer. I said, that looks like a PFD. And then I got even closer and I said, oh, that is my PFD. And so I picked up my PFD and I quickly discovered that the raccoon that dragged it 75 meters from my campsite had also got the Gorp trail mix that was in the outside pocket of my PFD. And so I was mad that I had lost or had potentially lost my PFD. I was glad to have found it again and glad that the raccoon didn't drag it off into the bush, so I maybe couldn't have found it again. Next slide. So the question is, what would you do if you were in the middle of a trip and you lost your PFD? It sounds like a hypothetical question, but it's a reasonable thing to consider. And I've run that by a lot of my paddling friends and guiding and instructing colleagues. And there's no right answer to this question, but it's worthwhile having the discussion to see what you might do in the off chance that you lose either a PFD or some other piece of equipment. No right answer, but good discussion. Next slide. So again, the weather forecast for the morning that we were actually going to try to leave Nell's Bite and cross Experiment Bite and try to get around the Cape. Again, West Coast Vancouver Island North, 4 o'clock in the morning, calling for gale warning. That means winds in excess of 30 knots. So calling for winds variable 5 to 15 in the morning, becoming south 10 to 20 knots in the afternoon, and then becoming even worse, southeast 20 to 30 knots overnight. sea state deteriorating from 2 meters to 2 to 3 meters. Next slide, Alan. Current, there's a current station right at Cape Scott in Scott Channel between Cape Scott and the Scott Islands. And the recommendation is to try to cross through that Scott Channel either at slack or on a slight ebb if you're going north to south. And so this was looking favorable for us with slack current just before 7 and a max current of minus 1.6 at basically 11 o'clock. Next slide. So we came out of Nell's Bight, and the weather was reasonable, overcast, but a little bit of moisture, and sea state was just fine. But boy, oh boy, did Cape Scott ever look a long way in the distance, or so we thought. Next slide. But it turns out what we thought was Cape Scott was actually the Scott Islands. Next slide. So we were seeing Cox and Lance Islands, which are offshore from Cape Scott. Next slide. And here you can see the Cape that we're actually going around. So from Nell's Bight out to the Cape, it was only about a 40-minute paddle. Didn't take us long at all. Next slide. So here you can see again in light blue the actual GPS track of our paddle. We left Nell's Bight on the right hand side of the slide, crossed over Experiment Bight, and then we eventually hit what was a pretty major decision point for us. Next slide. So up until this decision point, the paddling had been fine, but as we got closer and closer to the Cape, the sea state built and built and built and just got bigger and bigger. And as we got closer to the point, and we were faced with a decision of, okay, what do we do? Do we actually try to go around, or do we hunker down and backtrack into Experimental Bight? And we took a good 5-10 minutes just sitting there bobbing up and down in the ocean, looking at these big boomers crashing all along the shoreline, and pretty big wave sets coming up from the south to the north, figuring out what to do. Next slide. And at that point, I recalled a quotation from John Camantas's guidebook, and I told Barry, I remember Camantas saying, kayakers passing the Cape will probably stay close to shore. Next slide. Barry just looked at me and he said, there is no way in hell I'm going in there. Next slide. So what we ended up doing is we hung a pretty sharp right, and we decided to try to see if we could get around the mess that was facing us. And we ended up paddling northwest direction for probably 15-20 minutes towards the Scott Islands to see if we could get around the mess. And eventually we were comfortable enough to be able to slowly start heading south, the direction we eventually wanted to go. Once we made that change of direction, we were in 3 to 4 meter seas with really, really steep 3 to 4 meter waves, but they weren't breaking. And the reason I think that sea state developed was because we had a slight northerly wind and a slight ebb current and a 2 to 3 meter swell coming from the south up against those two. So that was stacking up the sea state there. So we were zooming down the backs of waves and coming back up the other side of the next wave and having our kayaks sort of launched and projected over the wave before crashing down the other side again. So we looked at each other and we said, well, we better start paddling a little bit closer to one another. We turned our radios on, and we just had a heck of a ride for about 20 minutes till we got past Guy's Bay there. And then eventually we made our way over to San Joseph Bay. And so at that point, oh, one more slide I have, Alan. I just need to give a shout out to Barry, best paddling partner ever. You speak to a lot of people and they say, word of the wise, pick your paddling partners wisely. And I just really have to say, I can't have picked a better paddling partner than Barry. We are so compatible in terms of compatible paddling skills, our paddling objectives, our risk tolerance and decision-making processes, and our paddling style. We've never had an issue. We've faced big conditions together, and we've faced big problems on trips that I won't talk about, but it's always gone well, and it's always been such a pleasure to paddle with you, Barry. So thanks for that. And that's the end of our trip, end of this section. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Willie. That's great. I want to know if Barry always has that rainbow over him. Does he? That'd be handy if you did, Barry. So we're going to move on. We're a little bit behind time, but I think people are enjoying it. I'm not going to push this too much. But we have the next group is Jenny, Debbie, and Michael and John will chip in as they will. And they're going to take us from Cape Scott, or from Cape Scott, Guys Bay, around to down into the Quatsino Sound entrance. So this is Jenny sharing her screen.
So has it happened?
It has happened. Yes, we see your screen.
Okay. Are you seeing all the slides on the left or just me?
Yeah, all the slides on the left. Yeah.
How do I get rid of that?
If you go to
view,
yeah,
go to view and go to view and then hit slideshow.
Thank you, Deb.
there we go. Beauty.
So, Deb and I are doing the presentation. I'm doing the first half, and then she's doing the second part. And then at the end, John and Michael and us, we can all pitch in with stories because we wanted to try and stay on time. Anyway, so our section is from, we actually stayed at Experiment Bite and then San Joseph Bay, and then we're stopping at the entrance to Quatsino Sound. So our trip was in 2015, 6 of us. That was my first big trip with open oceans. Yeah. So, and we did a shorter trip in 2021 from San Joseph Bay up to Cape Scott. And there's also information on our talk from BC Marine Trails. So we're going to cover West Coast paddling, the 3 Ps of paddling, our decisions on the pace of the trip, rounding the Cape, and campsites and side trips. So West Coast paddling, this picture, this is a calm day. I would say there's never a day on the West Coast where you don't have swell. So it's a demanding environment, requires solid experience in rough water paddling and a lot of practice with making challenging weather decisions with your paddling mates. We'll just go back. And you can see there's a lot of inhospitable coasts where you can't land. So the 3 Ps, planning, preparation, and practice. To me, this is as important as your skill set and as important as Willie says is picking your paddling partners. So trip planning, we use consensus decision-making. We don't sort of have one poobah in charge. We build in what we call weather days, so one extra day for every 4 or 5. Deb Leach got us going on what I think is an excellent tool. And if anybody wants it, we can get it to you. Oh, hang on. Is a trip contract where you talk, seems if I hit anything, it moves. Trip contract, for heaven's sakes, with expectations and agreeing on the style and the pace. I've got great paddling friends. We've got totally different ideas on the style and pace. What kind of conditions are sort of a no-go. In our group, if one person's not comfortable, the group does not go. And then having a return date with hopefully some flexibility in that. Do not have a deadline where you have to be back for something. So there were 6 of us and we were all level 2 or higher skills, not just a level 2 piece of paper, but actually skills. We did rough water practice together, rescues, and we also did a minimum of 1, and some people did 3 surf clinics with Go Kayak over in Tofino. And that's just so invaluable because you know on the West Coast, you're probably gonna have a surf landing and surf launching. Pace, and I'm a big culprit with this. I love smelling the kelp, and there's John smelling the kelp. We chose to do longer distance between camps and have more days with stopping over. I hate packing up and unpacking every day. It just takes up too much time. And as Alan said, allow for up to 3 weeks. We did it in 16 days. Plus you need the travel days because this is the north end of the island. So these are the campsites, and the ones in red are where we stopped on this particular trip. So there's Experiment Bite, and then San Joseph Bay in here, and then Keynes Beach in here where the other group will take over. The other ones we've either stopped at for bio breaks or lunch, or we got good information and photos from some of the other people that have been presenting today. So thanks to you folks for that. So I'll be talking about all these, so you don't have to memorize that. So Cape Scott, I just love this shot because that's Port Hardy over this way. We camped tucked in here because there was pretty strong southeast winds. This is very low lying, which sort of ties in with what happened to Barry and Willie. And so the southeast winds do come over the top and then they hit down further out. But when you tuck in, you're out of the southeast winds. There's remnants of Danish settlement and World War II radar stations in this area. The lighthouse is out here and it's manned. And you can also camp on the Guys Bay side if you've got northwesterly winds. So Cape Scott, we just threw this in because there's some of their old railway ties. And we're just doing a walk up to the lighthouse. And on our trip, we were able to get fresh water up the top. And this is the end of that Cape Scott trail from San Joseph Bay. So you do run into hikers. They usually don't camp at Experiment Bite. So there's our campsite in 2015. There's that low-lying grass area, loads of camping. We've put down surf is likely, but when you tuck right in to this northwest corner, it's pretty protected. So there's the lighthouse. Nothing as fancy as what we have down here. Great guys were there then. We had a lot of decision making to make because of the weather forecast. We were able to link in with these lighthouse keepers. They were able to get a better forecast than we could with our VHF radios, and they would radio us, and we stayed an extra couple of nights because of the southeast winds. So when you're making group decisions and it's not COVID time, Alan kindly carries his huge guide tarp, and there's nothing like having it up when you're stuck with weather because you can all cook under it and huddle under it, and we can make decisions without getting wet. So West Coast, again, inhospitable shoreline, probably 1 out of 5 trips, talking to Eve and Patty, who've done this trip a lot of times, you can actually get close to shore. So you're doing a lot of offshore paddling. Cape Scott, I think everybody gets to see the welcoming committee of the sea lions. Guys Bay, which is around the corner from Experiment Bite. This is where the hikers camp, and John said there was a lot of people there this summer when they were there. There's at least 12, I'd say there's more than 12 sites. The East Beach has the pit toilet and the food cache, and the West Beach is the surface lighter and you're more protected from the northwest winds. So there's Experiment Bite going around Cape Scott, coming down. You can, there's that Hansen Lagoon. We did do a stop this trip just for a bio break on our way north, but a good place to stop because it's about 14 miles from Experiment Bite into San Joseph Bay. So this is about 8 miles to Lowry Beach. It's a long beach with surf, but the south end has got an islet that it gives some protection. There's a small cabin and a pit toilet at the end. And between 2015 and 2021, it's really overgrown and looking very sad. There's supposedly a hike to Sea Otter Cove if you want to do that. And then from Sea Otter Cove, so there's Lowry Bay, Sea Otter Cove, and this is San Joseph Bay. You can do a day trip into here, but as far as I know, there's no camping in there. So San Joseph Bay. So when you come from Lowry, you've got to go around this Cape Russell, which can be very rough. We were okay on our day. It can also be too rough to go in around Hannah Point. Sometimes you actually have to go out and around, but we could sneak through, and it was lumpy bumpy. So we're going to be talking about Helen Islets, Hannah Point East, and then we've camped in here, and I'm going to talk about a campsite over here. Oh, actually it's over here. So Helen Islets, we checked it out, easy landing at mid and high tides, but there's rocks and boulders at low tides, and you're tucked up really high into the gravel and the trees there. Hannah Point's a lovely spot. This was this last year, I guess. Yeah. And so you're nicely protected from northwest winds, but southeast winds, you will get blasted. So know your wind direction before you set up camp. Lots of room along the beach for sites. The downside is you cannot walk into San Joseph Bay to see the sea stacks. San Joseph Bay. So this is just a view. There's our campsite. Long walk if you've got a low tide when you're leaving. And the sea stacks are in here. This is the north side again. We camped. There was a large boulder. I've got the GPS coordinates if anybody wants them. A landmark. And there was this waterfall with a lovely pool. You could wash your dry suit, collect water, wash your bodies and your clothes. So it was great. Great walking the sea stacks. There's a very special owl up in this tree here. There was when we were there. It didn't move very much. And you can walk all the way to San Joseph River. Just be careful with the tide because you can get caught with the tide. We did a nice paddle up San Joseph River to explore. And then this summer, last summer, we actually paddled from the campsite at San Joseph River out and up to Cape Scott. So you can go both ways. And then even Patty and John and Anne gave us these pictures. This is the campsite on the south side of San Joseph Bay, and they had nice gravel pebble beach. There was water nearby, and there's a looking out. And they were pants when the guys were over at Hannah Point getting wind blasted. These folks over here were nice and protected from that southeast wind. And now Deb's going to take over.
Okay, so moving south from San Joseph Bay, the distances to the next campsites don't look too far apart if you hug the coast, but you can't always hug the coast, and there's not a lot of bailouts. Next slide. Jenny, thank you. Cape Palmerston is a recreational site, and because it's easily accessed by vehicle, some people think that they might be able to launch, but there is a fairly long walk from the parking lot, evidently, and probably popular with recreational campers and nice tent pads and a cabin there. But as you can see, navigating the rocks could be a bit tricky just to get to the cobble beach. Next slide. So just south of that is a secondary site that has easier landing, and there's perhaps like more than 10 sites there, but it's a gravel rocky beach, and it's more protected in the northwest than Raft Cove. So you just have to bide your time and figure out which is the best location. Next slide, please. So we heard that Michael Ailson's son is a surfer that goes to Raft Cove. So we knew to expect surf if it's a low tide or when the swells are greater than 1 meter. And there is caution that you should be looking to land either south or north of the river mouth because it can be a bit scary. And as you can see, Paddler's Beach is the one facing the ocean, but usually there's a surf landing. And next slide, please. Raft Cove has plenty of tenting as well as pit toilets and a food cache and a 2.5 mile hike if you wanted to get out to the old growth forest, and you could possibly paddle up the Macjack River. Next slide, please. Comerell Point is just at the south end of Raft Cove, and half of our group actually pulled in there and we're radioing to the other 3 to say, hey, we've got a place where there's no surf, but they didn't have their radios on. So they had a little bit more fun in the surf zone. So at Comerell Point, the reef does create a more protected landing, and it's a gravel sand beach. And we thought that was a way better idea than paddling into Raft Cove. We're not sure how many tents could actually fit in there, but it is a plan B. Next slide, please. Heading south to Top Knot from Raft Cove isn't very far. Next slide, please. Oop. Yeah, it's good. And oh, back to the one with the big boats. Beautiful beach at Top Knot. Next slide, please. Thank you. Beautiful beach at Top Knot, especially if you land in the north corner, it's quite protected. And the Purdens reckon that you can get out through the surf in most conditions. Next slide. At Top Knot, there's good sand and gravel beach above the landing beach is where you could be camping. Next slide. And water available at the creek. Next slide.
Beautiful.
Jenny, next slide, please. And what compares to a West Coast sunset? Back to the sunset for a second, Jenny. Okay, we're quickly heading. Thanks, Willie, for that picture. Next slide, Jenny. So to Grant Bay from Top Knot is the next possible campsite. Jenny, thanks. Next slide. And there's another beautiful beach, which is protected from the northwest winds. A few rocks here and there. Next slide. And plenty of sites on the grassy upland. You can see there's a bit of a shelter there, as well as a pit toilet, and there's plan for an outhouse. And you can get water from a seasonal creek at Grant Bay. Next slide. And if you want to have a little bit of a hike, you can go up the trail to the road towards Browning Inlet, and you might find that there's campers walking in as well. Next slide. And south to Quatsino's, just another short hop around to the lighthouse and where we camped. Next slide. And this is our first view in 2015 of Quatsino, because we had a 22K paddle, and it was quite a relief to be beating the storm and getting into Keynes Beach. The next day, actually, we went to Winter Harbour, and people at the outpost were saying, "You were out in that?" And we said, "Yep," but we got tucked in behind the lighthouse. And so when you're entering Quatsino Sound from the north, you probably don't want to take the north route if there's a lot of swells. And this is the entrance to Gary's part to talk about Quatsino Sound.
So that's the lighthouse, and then Keynes Beach is in here.
Yep.
Okay, so I need to stop share.
That's right.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. That was
Thanks, Deb.
that was great. I think those of you who are thinking about this trip, those visuals of the campsites, I think you're going to want to go back to those at some point and take another look at them. That's great. So I have Gary now. Gary Weeks, are you on there?
Could you turn it on to Mike, please? And Mike can open up our slideshow.
Okay, go ahead, Mike.
I got the picker screen here. You guys see something now?
Not yet. Have you got share screen? There we go. We're starting to see something. Yep, now we got it.
Is it large enough?
That's pretty good.
Great. Okay, this is our group here. We're covering the Quatsino Sound. We don't have a name for our group, but here are the characters that we all paddle with for 11 days. So we got Gary Weeks, BJ Porter, Dave Chater, and myself, Mike Teachman. So we'll say the first person here, Gary Weeks, is the mastermind and the leader behind our trip. Gary called this the ultimate adventure, and we had the honor and privilege to be selected for this trip with him. And we just owe him a huge thanks for putting so much effort in and to leading us around the Cape and getting us through the end. So thank you so much, Gary.
You're welcome.
Okay, so once again, this is a refresher. Quatsino Sound is this area that you can see in yellow circled here. It's a very different area compared to what you've just seen. You've seen a harrowing trip around Cape Scott, swell, kind of wondering what was going to happen on surf landings. When you get around the point where Debbie left us, you sigh and just go, wow, we're in a protected area. And from here on in, it's quite a bit different, but still it has, you know, quite a unique West Coast beauty. So on our way in there, this was kind of a parting shot by the sea otters towards us. So 3 paddlers were in front of me and I was at the end, and I was almost seeing them saying, okay, get out of here, you buggers, you know, you're not welcome on the West Coast. And so I paddled by, took their picture, and then they took attention to me and started swimming towards me, went under, and then you get a little bit nervous, but that's the last we saw of them. So that sent us into our first beach called Keynes Beach, which is just past the lighthouse that Debbie showed. And what a view, just clear blue sky and warm and nice. So someone talked about a 1 in 5 chance that you could paddle to shore. We were that group. This was every day pretty much that we had on our trip from Port Hardy around Cape Scott. Cape Scott, we pretty well rock gardened around. And so we had days like this where we could just, you know, enjoy, and we didn't really have to worry about the weather so much. So this was pretty much it. So we got to Keynes Beach set up. It's a really nice place, a good view, as you can see. And actually, I'm just going to start. I'm going to make sure I don't go over here. So the next day, we decided that we were running low on beer and chips. And so we were going to go head into Winter Harbour, which is a little village of about 20 people, maybe swells to 200 in the summer because of all the fishing. So we were going to do this paddle from our Keynes Beach here and then into Winter Harbour. So along the way, we discovered Mr. Black Bear. I think somebody with keen eyes spotted the moving dot, and we got a little bit closer, and with the aid of the telephoto lens here, we watched this bear that was foraging through the like the intertidal zone, probably for, you know, some sort of grubs or mussels or something. But that was entertaining for a while. And then we got to Winter Harbour. It's largely a place of fishing. It's used to be big in commercial fishing, and now it's big into sport fishing. And it has one general store that opens published hours at 1 o'clock. And we got there maybe about 11, but it was closed up. But it's a pretty informal place. We met the owners, and it didn't take long before them to decide that they would open for us. And then we went in and got our replenished full of beer and chips and all the things that we had missed for the last 8 days. So I think BJ took this one. This was indicative of the type of washroom that was there. Careful, sink will pull off wall, careful turning on tap. So I don't think we caused any problems with this, and we carried on. And so there we are taken by Dave, and we're just enjoying the ambiance of Winter Harbour and the things that we were able to procure at the store. I had run out of beer at Raft Cove the day before, so it was dire for me to get restocked. Such as kayak camping, where you can take this stuff. So on the way back on our return trip, I stopped to do a little bit of fishing. We did fishing along the way. I can say I saw a record on this trip where we paddled into the site at Hannah Point. Gary stayed behind for 10 minutes and then joined us with 3 huge rockfish. Like, it was just incredible, like how fast you put your hook down and you come up with a fish. In my case, I come up with 60-centimeter lingcod, which are what these are, and the legal limit is 65. So I kept throwing them back one after another. So it was kind of a drag. One thing, I don't know if you can see here, but they see this little red thing on the fish's lip. This is something that Tony Playfair taught me and lent me for this trip, which is called a fish gripper. And J.F. Marlowe says is that when you bring up a fish and you're going to send it back, don't hold on to it because you'll take its slime off, which is bad for the fish. So you can grip it and then and just let go of it and get the fish hook out without hurting the fish. So on the way there, we spotted this really interesting archway that you could go through and paddle around. So everyone else had gone back to camp, and I was looking at this. And what do you think when you're looking at that? Does it look dangerous? It looks pretty flat. So I watched it for a little bit, and there's really no appreciable swell there, but little did I forgot to think about was the boat swell. It's a big fishing area, a lot of boats going back. So I entered into this area, and as I got right to the end, one of the boat swells made it through and funneled into this area and just picked me up like no tomorrow. And I started surfing into the back of this area, staring down at a pinnacle rock that was coming up. So I managed to brace and bank off the rock, and the kayak didn't sink. So I was good to go after that. And it was kind of funny. I pulled up my Strava image of this, and you can kind of see this squiggle here is, I think, when I got turned around and banked off the rock is what I did. And I actually circled back in disbelief that this happened, and sat there watching it for a bit. There wasn't another wave for another 5 minutes. So I guess we talked about this a little, and I guess the lesson for me is that if you're paddling solo, no matter how safe it looks, you got to be alert that something could happen. And so that was a bit of a humbling learning experience for me. In the end, there was no damage to the kayak, and so, but that was pretty interesting. I think that's it for me. I'm going to pass it off to. I'm going to keep. All right.
Okay.
Gary,
Yeah,
you're up next.
I think it's my section here, and here's where we took off from Keynes Beach. If you can paddle on there, Mike. And we left Keynes Beach and headed over towards the caves at Quatsino. They're across the way and along the Quatsino Provincial Park, beg your pardon. And they had, of course, they had a log in front of the caves. It had washed ashore, and I couldn't resist. I just had to push, tug, pull that log, but I couldn't get that thing off. So it stayed there, and we didn't get inside. Paddle on. And then we got on a little along the shoreline there on North Quatsino, and lo and behold, we had a great show of humpback whales right in front of us. It wasn't the only whales we saw. When we walked up to Cape Scott Lighthouse from 2 miles away, we saw some whales breaching back down in Cape Scott Channel. And from 2 miles away, those breaching whales looked incredible. It was an incredible show from 2 miles away. These guys were just feeding in front of us, and they just popped up, and we just hung tight. It's always amazing to see that kind of thing when you're right on the water. It's just so awesome. Paddle on. So we paddled on past the point there, and we hit Caprino Bay. But Caprino Bay was kind of early in the morning or midday or something like that. And we thought, oh, geez, you know what? We got lots of time here. We'll paddle on. We'll try to go to Prudhoe Point for a campsite. There's supposed to be a BC Marine Trail campsite there. We'll check it out, and we'll just camp at Prudhoe Point. But so we didn't stop at Caprino Bay. Instead, we went for a tour on a fish farm. And we just happened to pull up the fish farm, and this gal, Michelle, happened to be the manager and was out on the deck there. And I just asked her, do you have time? What do you think about giving us a tour? And she said, sure, come on aboard. So we spent about an hour and a half touring this fish farm, and we learned everything about fish farms. Here's the feed inside the feed shed. Paddle on. Here's the control room. They have a camera, 1 or 2 cameras in every pen, and they clean how they scrub the nets, how they clean the nets, how they clean the pens, how they take out the dead, some fish die during every day, and so they clean the dead fish out and the whole bit. She was actually in charge of 4 of these fish farm stations as the manager in Quatsino Sound. They're trying to work very closely with the Aboriginal, Native Indigenous band, the Quatsino band, and so they have Quatsino employees, and the other thing that we really noticed in Quatsino Sound, there was no garbage. So when you're up at Galetas Channel, you see these big blue 45-gallon drums all over the beaches, and just about every beach has at least one drum on it, and you can see it for miles away. But in Quatsino Sound, there was nothing. And you got to give credit to these guys, because maybe it's their location, maybe it's weather, maybe whatever. They just don't seem to have that kind of issue, even with all the logging camps and everything else. So we toured all the pens, and then we got back on the road again, and we headed down along the way. We passed Prudhoe Point. There was no room there for 4 tent sites, so we paddled around the corner to that other little bay just past Prudhoe Point. There was no suitable site for 4 tent sites there, so we crossed Quatsino Channel. And when we crossed, it got a little rough in the middle, but it was doable, and we made it all across. We had to deal with a few white caps, but it wasn't that bad. It was a short distance out in the middle. And once we got close to shore again, we stopped in at Clea Creek. Clea Creek is a log dump, active log dump with an Interfor Logging and Lemaire logging contractor. We talked to them. They were not very hospitable, and so we moved on for about another nautical mile up the way, and we found this amazing campsite. It was gravel up at tree line, just underneath the trees, and nice gravel beach. It was pretty good. There's water there. Paddle on. Oh, and yeah, and we just hung out there for the night, and that was where we ended up. BJ, do you want to take it over?
Okay, thank you, Gary. Day 11. We've traveled 13.5 nautical miles, which by that point in the trip didn't seem like very much at all. We did do this trip fairly quickly. We did it, what was it, 10 days, I think? 11 days. So we were hot to trot. Next slide, please. So this is Dave near Clea Creek. You can see there's the notch there. That's where the creek is. There's a lot of nice fresh water here. Gary had a wash, I think, and that's very close to the campsite that he was just describing, where you saw me in my little hidey hole there. We did have to do a little bit of work on that campsite. I must admit, we did a little bit of cultural modification of the campsite, because the forest in a lot of Quatsino Sound, the forest comes right down to the water. And that's why we had a little bit of trouble finding a campsite until we did find that Clea Creek. And because of that, we only had the 13.5 miles to go back to Cole Harbour. And so we hoofed it back in that last day. Had a bit of a horse to the barn syndrome for the latter part of the trip, but it was all good. So next slide. This is a good sense of some of the conditions we had, and we were so blessed. I actually thought that I was going to have to be prepared for so much rough, wild water. But in fact, you never know what the challenges are going to be. So for me, it was an 11-day forward stroke clinic, because I don't know if you saw at the picture at the beginning, my size compared to my paddling companions. So that was the big challenge for me. Next slide. So that's just Gary smiling. That's his big boat. We all had to, of course, carry each other's boat up the shingle all the time. And his boat weighed quite a bit, I can tell you. And next one. We saw this is about probably 30 or 40 minutes before arriving back in Cole Harbour. The photo, in fact, our photos don't do justice to the trip at all. I think when the best stuff is happening, you don't have your camera out. But there were some pretty amazing rock formations at that point. Next slide. That's just a picture of a helmet that was not used. We carried our helmets, we didn't use them at all. Next slide. This is just again in that area of the rock formations. I just wanted to mention a shout out to Gary Davidson. I had ordered a boat for this trip that never arrived in time, and he lent me this Solstice GT, with which I was very happy. It's a big boat, and in order to edge it, I sort of had to climb out onto the deck. But I did feel very safe and solid in it the whole trip. Now, next slide. So we're almost home here. You can see Cole Harbour in the distance. Next slide. And here we are landing in Cole Harbour. That's the extent of our gear. We all did a celebratory roll at the end. So I had, I think, my second experience of rolling a loaded kayak and got that sort of bugbear out of the way. It's really not that hard. It just rolls slower. So you have to be prepared for that. Next one. So this is me looking pretty proud of myself. One thing I wanted to point out, and this is a cautionary tale, you can see that I have my running shoes on here. That's because I didn't have to keep them dry for the evening. I made serious poor footwear choices. So we did a sort of rescue clinic with Patty and Eve as part of our preparation for this trip. And doing so, I lost a kayak shoe. So what I did, I had seen Marlene Harper wear wool socks and water sandals. So that was my choice for the whole trip. And it couldn't have been a worse choice, because a combination of the abrasion of the sand inside the cockpit and the constant wetness meant that I had blisters, which were like much bigger than loonies. And not only that, but I got what I think was trench foot. So all the way from my heel, all the way up my Achilles tendon was excruciating to touch, and sort of bright red. And there was no way of getting around it because I was kayaking all day, every day. So I'm going on about this, but I can tell you it was a challenge. And so don't do that. Don't be like me. Next slide. So I insisted on taking this picture because I wanted to get a record of my 3 grizzled companions here. I think that's probably more stubble than any of them have had for some years. And I like the big smiles. Next one. And this was kind of interesting because as we were landing, you can see we were right beside, there's one of our boats right there. There was a hangar nearby for these float planes, and they load the float planes with the people already in it, just like that. And they were floating a plane about 1 every 10 minutes while we were there. So very active little area. And that's about it. That's the end of our presentation. And thanks very much, guys. You were all great.
Oh, thank you very much. That was great. And I guess if Mike's got the screen, maybe you can stop your screen share there, Mike, and we'll get back to the gallery view. That's great. Thank you. That was a tour de force, I think, with all the different perspectives. You got some really different ideas about that area. We don't really have time to have you quiz folks, but I hope that you have taken some ideas from this. And I watched the chat. I think there weren't too many questions. Some of them have been answered as we went along. Maybe I'll just ask, has anybody got a real burning question for anybody who's been talking the last few minutes? If so, unmute yourself and shout it out. No? Okay. So what I'd suggest is that, you take to heart some of the lessons that these paddlers have learned, and but take away with you the fact that this is an amazing area. It's not that far away. It's on the island where we sit. You really should find a way, and it may not be to take that whole trip. It may be to explore part of it in a different way or do it a bit at a time. And it probably means checking your paddling skills and having some very good companions, as you heard. But it's too good to miss, I would say. So that was a great presentation, you guys, and I think we have to call that a pretty good success to share it out with a few glitches here and there. It seemed to work quite well. Now, what we normally do after these presentations by people that we've invited to talk is we turn it back to Fred, who's our meeting coordinator, to kind of a formal thank you. So I'll do that in a second. But before I do, I'll just mention we have yet to award our draw prize for the evening. So if you're at all interested in that, hang on, because Debbie Leach, the prize maven for Siska, has been duly noting who's still on the line, and we'll have a prize given out. But first, Fred, over to you to thank our presenters for the night.
Okay. I certainly enjoyed the presentation, and what I'd like to do is get a review from other folks. This is the first time we've ever tried to do this, where we've taken a large area and divided it up amongst a group of paddlers. So in your bottom of your screen, there's a little button that says reaction, and I'm going to change my view from speaker to gallery. And if this is something you really enjoyed, if this is something you think we should do again, go down into the reaction and put a thumbs up next to your face.
Some of them. Go to the next page.
Nice, nice.
So yeah, I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up. So obviously this worked. So maybe we'll do it again. If you have certain areas, I'm going to switch my view back to speaker. If you have areas that you want people to do presentations from, send me an email. Gail and I share an email address, gailmiller@shaw.ca. Let me know what you'd like to see. Okay. Normally, at the end of one of these presentations, we give out a Siska mug to our presenters. So how do I divide up one Siska mug? What, again, 16 presenters? That's going to be a difficult chore. So before tonight, I had Gail pick a number from 1 to 4. She had no idea who was doing the presentation or who was going to be in the different groups. And her number was number 3. So the people from number 3 get the mug, and they have to figure out how they're going to share it or who gets it. So good luck on that one, folks. And
So just to clarify, that number 3 was the third group to present?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Jenny's group.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yay!
yeah.
Oh,
so,
you lost your mug.
No, I've got one.
okay, so
So Alan, I'm ready to do the prize draw because we've lost 40 people already.
Yeah. Well, okay, so over to Deb. She's got some, I'm going to describe the prize first, Deb.
Sure. Yeah, we try to bundle together about $100 worth of safety gear, and this month it's a sea light, the navigation, sea state and weather book, as well as a bivy sack. And so hopefully somebody that wins is still on the line, and the winner is Jack Mackey. You still here?
Mackey.
Hello?
Jack, if you're on the line, say something.
I can't tell.
Jack lives next door to us if you want us to pick it up, or you'll draw someone
Oh, he's
else.
got to be on the line to win.
Okay.
Yeah, we
How
have
about-
rules here.
Diane Labbe.
Diane Labbe. Yeah? No,
Okay.
no.
Yeah. Diane, are you on?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great.
Okay. So Diane, can you put your email in the chat, please? And I'll get this connected up with you.
Okay. Thank you.
Alrighty, super. Okay, I just wanted to rush things. Okay.
Yeah, great. Okay, well, thank you, Debbie, and congratulations to Diane. So I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. Anybody have something that needs to be said? An announcement kind of came to you while we were doing our presentations?
Yeah, Bob here. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Oh. Testing 1, 2.
I can hear you.
Okay, this is just a notice for Alan. He mentioned, well, not just for Alan, but I guess for all the clubs, the executive of all the clubs within BC. Alan, you mentioned something regarding with Siska having members present a confirmation of vaccination. Just to let you know, what's coming down the line here is that that's a right to people's privacy. And there's what they're sending out is what it's called a notice of liability to companies and businesses and to clubs, just informing them that if you are requiring these mandates, that you could be subject up to a $75,000 fine for that, pending whether it goes to law or not, whether it gets they win it in court. But these are breaches that they're finding of the Charter of Rights, and so that's coming down.
Bullshit.
Well, I'll just say, Bob, I'll say thank you and appreciate your point of view on that. We're going to continue, obviously, with our program, and we just encourage everybody to do the right thing, and we'll leave you with that. I think if that was the only comment, then I think we'll.
Helen, I've got one last thing. Helen, Fred here. Those of you from Siska know that I put out a calendar every year.
Yes.
The profits from that, not a lot of money, goes to charity. And this year it went to our place. So I'll cut them a check, and they sent me a nice thank you.
Very good. I appreciate that.
It was given in Siska's name.
Okay, thanks, Fred. Jeannie, you trying to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say two things. First, that people should be aware that they can access Quatsino Sound by just launching in Cole Harbour, and there's lots of wonderful options in that protected area. And they can go to Marble River Canyon on the other side of the Narrows, which we really enjoyed doing. But and also, I'm coming down tomorrow, Debbie, if you want me to bring that mug or bring the prize up to Diane.
Okay, sure, perfect. And you bring my PFD down?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
It's great. Does anybody else need to take anything to anybody before you?
I'm bringing Elizabeth her suit.
Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your attention, and especially to the presenters. Well done, everybody. That was great. Don't forget Cape Scott. It's out there.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, see you next time.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.